Before first light, the trail looks like a thought the land is still deciding to finish. The horizon is a low bruise, the stars thinning, the wind nosing through greasewood as if testing the scent of strangers. Then comes the harness jingle and the breath of horses, 6 of them, snorting little ghosts into the cold. The driver settles, jaw set, one hand heavy with reins, the other feeling for a whip he hopes he won't need. Inside, a mother folds a blanket over her sleeping child, a prospector cradles a worn leather poke, a teamster, stiff from freight runs, rubs his palms and stares at the shuttered window. The guard on the roof shifts his weight, the butt of a 10-gauge warm against his thigh. The bugle cuts the dark. The Concord sways forward, and the Overland Trail wakes up. They call this road Overland, but it is more than an idea on a map. It is a stitched line that begins on the Missouri and climbs toward the Rockies, skirting the South Platte, swinging through Colorado's dry country, then arcing into southern Wyoming to rejoin older ruts at Fort Bridger before making for the Great Basin and Salt Lake. It is commerce and promise at a trot. It is also a dare, to outrun distance before distance hunts you down. That's why Ben Holladay, the Stagecoach King, set his line here. Away from the trouble that brewed along the old Oregon Road and close to the swelling Front Range trade. Beginning in Atchison, Kansas, his coaches rose along the Platte, through Julesburg, then into the wind-cut basins of Wyoming, a living relay of leather and nerve. If the coach is the story, its body is the sentence. Oak and ash ribs, iron shoes, and a hull slung by leather, thorough braces that trade jarring for a cradle swing. New Hampshire craftsmen at Abbott Downing built them tall and stubborn. Inside, 3 benches could take 6, 9, even 12 passengers, depending on the model, with more perched on the roof beside the boot. The rocking motion isn't luxury so much as survival, a way to lift stress off wood and spare the team on roads that are mostly intentions scuffed into the earth. Passengers learn the sway, the little dance that keeps balance and stomach, while the driver, seat high for leverage, leans into the forever shifting box as if arguing it into line. Mark Twain, given to needle and wonder in equal parts, once wrote a coach like this and called it an imposing cradle on wheels. The phrase fits, even out here where nothing is truly safe. On good mornings, the cradle holds you. On bad ones, it rocks you toward whatever waits around the next bend. The road survives on rhythm. About every 10 to 12 miles, a swing station, nothing pretty, a low house of sod or rough boards, a well or spring nearby, a corral with its hungry chorus of wickers, waits with a fresh team. The driver tosses the lines to a hostler, straps buckles and curses fly. The bugle trills, you're off again. Then after 40 to 60 miles, a home station gives more than breath. Beans and coffee, a cot with a ticking mattress, the brisk chatter of a telegraph key tapping news from the far edges of a country trying to think itself whole. That pulse, a wire drawn along much of the Platte since 1861, may be the one sound louder than the wind out here. There's a secret, too, in how the coach keeps time. The driver's left hand carries the main burden, a braid of lines that speak to each horse. The right corrects, coaxes, and, if heaven frowns, flicks. With 4 to 6 horses in the team, you live by small adjustments. How the off-leader likes his mouth, how your wheelers brace when the road drops into ruts that could swallow a boot. The guard's eyes sweep the rim rock and the shadows in the cut banks. He counts what isn't there. No antelope cropping the flats, no prairie dogs cheering gossip, one telegraph pole leaning wrong. You trust the silence as long as it behaves like silence. When it starts acting like a plan, you move. By the early 1860s, Holladay's Overland had settled into a tough grace. Concords rolled day and night, passengers swaying through 1,000 private calculations. Ought I have taken the riverboat? Is gold still in the creek when I arrive? Will Denver be kinder than St. Joe? While the company's payroll fed station tenders, blacksmiths, drivers, conductors, and guards across the breadth of the plains. This was a road of wagers, on weather, on wheelwrights, on the idea that the nation's westward breath would not choke on dust. Holladay liked big wagers. He placed them with stock, contracts, and schedules. In time, he would place one last bet, selling the line before the Iron Horse made coaches into museum pieces. But that is later. For now, the only iron that matters rings under the coach wheels. Beyond the glow of the lamp at your knees, The prairie refuses to confess its intentions. The mother hushes her child. The prospector thumbs the edge of his poke. Two men share a canteen, wincing at the bite of alkali. The driver steers for the faint lift of ground that says the trail still knows its way. In this hour, the landscape is an argument between need and memory. Buffalo once shouldered the grass down so thick you'd call it a moving hill. Now their ghosts share the earth with the road's new anatomy: ruts, poles, stations, wire. Progress throws a long shadow. Not everyone agrees where it should fall. The wire brings speed, and speed brings vulnerability. Attacking a stage station, burning its hay, running off its stock, cutting its line to the next outpost, can make a road feel like a string of empty rooms. In the wake of Sand Creek in late 1864, those tactics traveled with a grief that had run out of words, and with a fury that any soldier stationed on the Platte could read by the light of burning ranches. A town like Julesburg, with its stage barns, storehouses, and fort nearby, felt like a fist waving from the road. In January 1865, that fist would be seized and turned. But all that lies past the next horizon. Tonight is only the feeling that miles are heavy, horses are mortal, and the quiet might not be friendly. A telegraph key ticks at the last home station. 3 words, then a burst of numerals, then the practiced lull between messages. News leaps faster than any hooves ever will. A price of flour, a regiment's movement, a rumor of gold. The conductor checks his waybill, runs a hand down the canvas mail sack, and nods to the driver. The guard stretches, rolls his shoulders, and squints at the line of poles marching into the dawn. If the Overland Trail has a face, this is it. Men and women stepping into their appointed labors, trusting a harness and a timetable to hold chaos at bay. The coach eases onto the flats. Heat will come later. For now, the air is needle crisp, the earth tender with frost. The driver senses the team growing bold with the light and lets them add a sliver of speed. 2 miles out, he sees it. A pole leaning wrong, the brake too clean for wind. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. The guard has already seen it, and the prospector inside hears something change in the sound the road makes under the wheels. Ahead, the next station's gate hangs a little ajar. The driver's hands tighten. There are rules for this. Rules written in sweat and rumor more than paper. A station too quiet can be a stage set with the audience in the wings. The Concord rocks, its swing as steady as breath, and the driver takes the left of the 2 ruts, the one with darker dirt and fewer hoof holes, the one that suggests a wagon may be passed without stopping. He counts, not miles now, but options. The lay of the creek to his right, the spine of gravel to his left. The angle he'll take if the yard ahead holds more than fresh horses. Inside, the mother kisses her child's hair and feels for the cross at her throat. The prospector tucks the poke deeper under his coat. The teamster on the forward bench shifts to get his hand toward the shutter. All roads, sooner or later, ask a price. This one is honest enough to tell you up front. The fee will be collected in fear and sometimes in blood. The Overland teaches a kind of frontier courtesy. Watch what isn't moving, listen for what isn't said, and keep the coach rolling if the prairie gives you silence that feels like a plan. The driver breathes in, slow as a prayer, and gives the smallest lift to the lines. The Concord answers, the team lengthening into the first true sprint of the morning. The station grows in the window like a question the day has decided to ask. The Overland Trail is a road. It is also a verdict waiting to be read aloud. In a little while, on this run or the next, men will have to decide whether a gate swinging loose means thirst, laziness, or an ambush with riders crouched in the cutbanks. But not yet. For now, the coach holds its rhythm. The wire hums, and the land stares back as if daring the coach to keep its promise. Schedule against distance, courage against surprise. A cradle on wheels rocking through the breath before daylight fully arrives. Before this run, before the leaning pole and the gate that hung wrong, there was another morning on the plains, bright, brittle, and permanently cracked. It was November 29th, 1864, along a sandy bend of a shallow creek in southeastern Colorado Territory. A Cheyenne Arapaho village stirred to the ordinary sounds of winter camp. Wood smoke, horse bells, a baby fussing, while a column of Colorado volunteers under Colonel John Chivington ghosted down on them with howitzers and loaded muskets. Flags flew, An American flag and a white banner said to have been raised for peace. Neither slowed the charge. By nightfall, the nation would learn a new phrase for its long account with the plains: Sand Creek Massacre. The tally was women and children, elders and men, bodies left in a wind that remembered every treaty and every promise and knew how poorly the paper held. Black Kettle lived through it. Many did not. The few soldiers who refused to fire would spend years explaining why they could not shoot people who had come in under a pledge. Most everyone else would live with the echo. Grief and rage have their own trail logic. Through the hard winter that followed, Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, Northern Arapaho and Lakota bands rode the old paths along the South Platte, stringing camps where grass still showed green under snow and council fires could be banked against the wind. They met near Cherry Creek in the first days of January 1865, a council remembered in both oral history and military dispatches, where warriors painted their faces and elders spoke of vengeance and balance. The wire strung along the valley was more than an invention. It was an insult, a fast road for other people's decisions. They chose a target that would hurt that road and everything it pretended to protect. Julesburg, a noisy stage hub at the edge of a new-built post called Fort Rankin. Julesburg was a frontier warehouse of appetites. The Overland Trail came right through town, bumping past a stagecoach station, stables, an express and telegraph office, a warehouse stacked with goods, and a big store that fed miners pushing for the Rockies. The place liked to think it could take care of itself. There were civilians who kept rifles by the door and dug sod walls stout as pride. And to the west, a mile beyond, the fort, soon to be renamed Fort Sedgwick, kept a company of cavalry under Captain Nicholas O'Brien. 60 troopers, give or take, the kind who had learned that firearms rust faster than courage on the Platte, and that both were always in short supply. The fort's wall rose high from the prairie, like a box drawn around a dare. On January 7th, cold cleaved the air, and the river flashed iron under a pale sun. Out on the bluffs, scouts signaled, and the plan the council had hammered together began to move. It was a familiar tactic, made perfect by the distance and the urge to chase: decoys. A Cheyenne called Big Crow chose a handful of young men who could ride like the wind and grin at death. They made a show near the fort and stage station, whooping, firing a ragged volley, and then turned their ponies as if panic had thrown the reins. The insult was the point. At the gates, soldiers cursed, civilians shouted, the bitter human mix of relief and bravado sloshed over, and the chase was on. Captain O'Brien took the bait, as he was supposed to, and led a force out after the few. 3 miles from the fort, the country opens a little, a rippled apron of bluffs and coulees where everything crouches until it decides to run. That is where the decoys curved and the hidden line rose. Hundreds, then near 1,000 Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota warriors, faces hard with winter paint, lances whispering, rifles and bows lifting in one long flex of muscle and memory. The names most often attached to that morning read like a roll call. The South Platte never forgot. Roman Nose riding in his prime, Spotted Tail among the Brûlé leaders, Pawnee Killer of the Oglala, and other headmen and War Society figures whose fame rode mostly by word of mouth. The shape of the land helped them. The shape of the plan made the most of it. There is a moment in every ambush when the hunted men understand the story they are in. For O'Brien, it came early, when some of the youngest warriors fired a breath too soon and smoke puffed up from the bluffs in a way the captain could not mistake. He saw the crowd in the earth and felt the weight of numbers drop onto his small command. Orders snapped short, back to the fort now, and the riders turned down valley at a gallop that stripped the cold from their throats. The plains have a long memory for chases. This one burned. Warriors poured off the high ground as if gravity itself had chosen sides. The distance to the fort, measured in yards, not miles, grew into an ocean of hoofbeats and screaming horses, of men trying to keep their seats while the world closed like a fist. Some soldiers fell and tried to fight from the ground. They died there. Others kept their saddles and made the gates, with the fort's howitzer spitting a blunt punctuation that meant, inside, inside, live to load again. Behind the walls, guns cracked from firing ports while the town beyond the fort's reach learned what a raid planned in winter felt like. With the soldiers penned, the Native Alliance moved through Julesburg. Storehouses yawned open, the stage barns were stripped, and whatever could not be carried was smashed. It wasn't chaos. It looked like people harvesting, because that is what it was. Seizing food and blankets, powder and lead, coffee and sugar, tools and clothing, all of it to be packed on travois and ponies for the march north to safer country. The telegraph wire went dead. The valley understood anew that speed belongs to whoever controls the road. Numbers have a way of bending to the storyteller, but the best surviving accounts agree on the rough measures of the day. About 1,000 Allied warriors, around 60 soldiers, and perhaps 40 to 50 armed civilians who tried to help them. 14 soldiers and 4 civilians left dead. As to native losses, soldiers later claimed a heap. The warriors said none. Between those polls runs the usual frontier arithmetic, but the outcome did not need a ledger to be plain. The decoy worked. The garrison bled, recoiled, and watched the Overland's best supplied station in that country emptied before their eyes. The story could have ended there. A sharp strike, a warning delivered, vengeance tallied by the strict math of grief. But the road encourages momentum. After the first raid, the Allied camps did not fold their lodges and vanish. They turned the length of the South Platte into a classroom for the Overland's weaknesses. Ranches, road ranches, and lesser stations found their hayricks flaring into night signals. Corrals were opened and stock driven off in moon-silver streams. Some nights the valley glowed for miles, like a city had been laid down and then decided against itself. The wind carried 2 tunes, women calling children closer to the fire, and men riding out to see if the dark could still be negotiated. On the wire, where it wasn't cut, operators tapped fevered messages that felt like prayers translated into code. In the fort, Captain O'Brien counted his command and their ammunition. He had learned a lesson no officer forgets. The field can make a fool of a gallant plan, and the decoy invited you to write your name on a casualty report. He would not be the last to read that page. The civilians inside the walls, merchants whose fingers now trembled when they lifted a ledger, station men who could dress a harness blindfolded, stood on the parapet and watched their livelihoods carried away in bundles. The Overland Trail had always measured time in minutes between stations. Now the road began to measure itself in smoke to the horizon. As for the warriors, the decision was not to defend Julesburg or linger. Their people needed to move, north and west, toward the Powder River and the Black Hills, away from posts that sat like thumbs in a healing wound. But they would not travel hungry, so they gathered what the town and the line could give, and when they had finished their harvest, they slipped out into the shallow cuts and river bends they knew as well as the backs of their hands. To the army, it looked like retreat. To the Alliance, it was logistics. They had another lesson in mind, and they would teach it at Mud Springs and Rush Creek before winter lost its teeth. Somewhere along the edge of that valley, a station tender poked at a stiffening fire and listened to his own heartbeat in a room that smelled of ash and mule sweat. Somewhere else, a telegrapher sat on a stool with a blank wire, staring at the key as if will alone could mend the cut. A few miles away, a driver who had always believed that order could be made with reins and a whip found himself looking at empty corrals and understanding that a coach with no team is only a box with good intentions. The Overland Trail would not stop, not yet, but for the first time it understood that distance wasn't its most dangerous enemy. People were. People with reasons. People who read the road as a wound and decided to press it until the nation cried out. By the time the last wagons rolled out from the plundered stores at Julesburg, the story had already left the valley and begun to travel ahead of itself, across barracks, rooms, and bunkhouses, into emigrant tents and Denver newspapers. Stage passengers heard it from drivers who had learned to read every folding shadow. Soldiers repeated it with an admixture of anger and admiration, reserved for foes who have shown you how easily you could have died. Along the wire, when it came back to life, the tale zipped east and west as if ashamed of how slowly hooves must carry truth. The lesson that Dawn had written was simple as a hoof print and about as permanent. A bait you cannot ignore is the deadliest kind. And far up the line beyond our driver's sight, the next stations were taking stock, counting cartridges, counting horses, counting how many men it takes to keep a schedule intact while a valley flickers like a row of warning lamps. Soon enough, names will be put to new fights. Mud Springs, Rush Creek. Each one a stone in a cairn the Overland Trail will have to pass whether it wants to or not. For now, the wind combs ashes, and the road that was so sure of itself tightens its jaw. The prairie has a way of teaching without raising its voice. You listen, or you repeat the lesson until there is no one left to hear it. It began with wind and wire. In the first days of February 1865, the telegraph along the South Platte stuttered, then went dumb, like a singer who sensed a pistol under the table. Poles leaned in a way that told a practiced eye the break was made by men, not weather. Somewhere between stations a herd moved that should not have moved. Army horses and cattle tugged out of corrals and swept across the winter grass like a dark river, changing banks. The riders who bent that river north and west were the same alliance that had punished Julesburg in January. Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota, carrying grief for Sand Creek, and a precise understanding of what hurt the overland most. They were not out to occupy towns. They were out to make a road feel like a trap of its own design. The first hard blow fell at Mud Springs, a little lifeline of water and hay on the high prairie, a place that had been a Pony Express stop before the Overland absorbed its bones. The station tender woke to a day where the horizon had riders in it. The few men on hand, telegrapher, hostler, a handful of soldiers detached to keep the wire honest, pulled the shutters tight and counted what they had. A brace of sharps, a crate of ammunition, a water source not easy to poison, and in a call for help they could send down the line if the wire still listened. It didn't. Before noon, the first shot struck the sod like stones, and the station understood that its square of earth had become a wager with no odds posted. Relief came in the shape of dust plumes from the west. Lieutenant Colonel William O. Collins hustling men from Fort Laramie to the sound of a valley going strange. Collins brought cavalry and the discipline of a man who had reread his own orders too many times to be surprised by their ambiguities. He looked at the ground, the springs, the scattered outbuildings, and did the sensible thing. Hunkered in, used the station as a knot to tie his detachments together, and set pickets where the land offered a sliver of advantage. Warriors slid through the cut banks and saged the way water finds low ground, testing the perimeter, trading long shots with the soldiers, probing for weakness with speed and dust. The fight stretched across days, February 4th through 6th, burning the cold out of the air. In the end, nobody could say the field had been taken, but the alliance carried away stock by the hundreds. Horses enough to matter, cattle enough to feed people moving a long way, and that was victory of a quieter kind. The army tallied few killed and wounded. The warriors tallied what they had added to the herd and the time they had bought for the march north. A battle like that changes the sound inside a man's skull. For station keepers, the world narrowed to lamp oil, cartridges, and water buckets. Telegraphers who had been used to hearing the Republic think aloud through their keys sat with quiet in their laps and discovered it was heavier than a crate of lead. The civilians near the post dug family heirlooms out of trunks with the strange clarity that comes when home starts to resemble a hill you're asked to hold. A few emigrant families caught between stations with their wagons and winter-thin teams learned in an afternoon what overland means when help sits a day's ride away and the horizon won't keep still. Collins did what a good officer does when the field refuses to settle. He pulled out to safeguard his wounded, kept scouts feeling the edges, and read the movement that streamed away from Mud Springs not as defeat, but as a column changing shape. He knew the next blow would land soon, somewhere close. The only question was where the wire would next be strangled and the road next be shown its own reflection. The answer came fast. Rush Creek. The creek was only a crease in the earth, a place where cottonwoods clung to moisture and wind laid down in eddies. But its banks stood near the North Platte like a handy knuckle. On February 8th and 9th, Collins with about 185 soldiers collided with roughly 1,000 Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho. The numbers were not the worst of it. The ground was. The fight strung itself along both sides of the river and the creek's broken margins, so that the field felt like three arguments at once. Skirmishers tugging at brush lines, horsemen wheeling in and out of rifle range, and across it all the long patience of men trading shots they could rarely see land. George Bent, the Cheyenne mixed blood, who would later become one of the most valuable witnesses of these years, rode with the alliance and remembered the shape of the battle as a test more than a stand. The soldiers could not be pushed into a rout, and the warriors did not intend to die teaching them a lesson they had already learned. In the end, the result was called inconclusive. Killed and wounded on both sides. No ground switched hands, but the Alliance kept the initiative, and the road learned again what it meant to hold on by the fingertips. If you walked Rush Creek afterward, you would not have thought it inconclusive. Cottonwood bark shaved by bullets, dug hoof marks where ponies tore off in tight crescents, the iron stink of blood in the shade. That is a conclusion of a kind. The soldiers buried their dead and sent their wounded back upriver under guard. The warriors melted up the valley in bands, the way breath leaves a man who has decided to run rather than argue with a knife. The herd, horses, cattle, went with them, a treasure more useful than anything locked behind the doors of a stage station. Between Mud Springs and Rush Creek, the Overland's many faces learned the same lesson from different angles. An emigrant family heard a few shots far off and watched a line of cattle that did not belong to any rancher they knew pass across a ridge like a procession. A station woman pulled bread from a Dutch oven and set it beside a rifle on a rough board table with the normalcy of someone putting two truths next to each other. A driver reined up at a swing station and saw the yard a mess of trampled hay and empty hitching posts, and felt a hand squeeze his throat that had nothing to do with fingers. The telegraph, when it came back in staccato flashes, brought numbers in near places. 8 wounded here, 2 killed there, wire cut at mile X. But it could not bring the smell of the thing, the way the land itself seemed to lean away from your wagon wheel. The Army, for its part, learned to escort stages, to move in packets, to sweep before they entered a yard, to keep howitzers where they could shout even if the words were dull. Soldiers muttered about the courage of the men they fought, because you do not spend 2 days trading shots across a river with ghosts and walk away pretending your enemy is made of cardboard. The Alliance learned, again, that you can starve a road without owning it. For people who counted victory and nights slept without fear and children not hungry in the morning, a captured herd mattered more than a flag over a sod wall. Reports afterwards tried to make sense of what would not stand still. One paper called Mud Springs a repulse. Another called it a harvest. An officer wrote that the line had been protected. A warrior told his son later that the river of stock they turned toward the Powder River country was the proof. The historian's ledger can say inconclusive with clean type. The men who resaddled horses that bled freely at the girth had different adjectives. The truth is that neither side broke, which in a winter that had already taught so much about grief and rage, constituted both mercy and promise. Mercy that the ground did not drink more than it did, and promise that the road's season of running fights was not done. Meanwhile, the Overland Trail kept to its calendar like a stubborn man keeps to his habits. Coaches still clattered out of Atchison with waybills and postmarks. Drivers still read the weather in the horses' ears. Guards still counted shadows. But the rhythm had changed. A home station that had once been a refuge could be a stage set for a trap. A swing station could be stripped to bare stud and smell like fear baked into lumber. Schedules flexed. Conductors walked the length of the coach at each halt, hand on the mail sacks as if weight alone could answer for what had been entrusted to the line. If you listen closely to the diaries of that month, and there are a few written tight as fists, you hear a shared new habit, people counting distance by peril rather than miles. It is 10 miles to the next water, becomes, it is 2 ambushes to the next water. Between Mud Springs and Rush Creek, the prairie did not transform itself into a battlefield, so much as confess it had always been one when strangers insist on passing. The road had made a promise, speed as a sort of citizenship, and February forced it to add an asterisk, speed when the land lets you. When the dust settled on the 9th and Collins drew his men away from Rush Creek, the Alliance did what they had intended from the beginning, shifted their people and their wealth of stock toward North Country grass. The wiremen rode out with mules and spools, shrugging into work that looked like sewing and felt like a duel with scissors you could not see. Station tenders rebuilt gates that would swing wrong again before winter quit. A driver on the night run tapped the horn twice at the yard, and for a long breath nobody answered. Then a lantern bobbed from the house and a voice said, "Hurry then," and the exchange took 45 seconds rather than 30, because hands shake when history puts its thumb on them. The road did not stop. It rarely does. But in the ledger of the Overland Trail, February 1865 would be its own chapter, written in a hurried hand. Mud Springs, held but stripped. Rush Creek, held but hurt. The line, alive but different. In upcountry, where the night is quieter and the stars seem to sit lower in the bowl of the sky, a long column of people led a captured wealth of hooves and breath toward places where children might sleep without waking to gunfire. That, too, is a conclusion, not the kind an officer writes, the kind a mother counts with her fingers when the campfire burns low. What follows is a single run told as one breath, but it is made from many breaths taken between 1862 and 1865 by drivers, guards, passengers, soldiers, and station men scattered along the Platte and Sweetwater. Some scenes live in affidavits and ledger books, some ride in memoir and recollection, a few drift in that hard borderland where memory shades into legend. We hold the facts tight and let the rest fill the spaces only where it must. Dawn lifts cold from the sage. The coach is out of Virginia Dale, bound toward 3 crossings by way of low rises that look friendlier than they are. 6 horses in 2x2, the leaders alert and sensitive, the swing team to keep the line straight, the heavy wheelers built to fight the pull and brake. The driver's left hand wears the braided lines like a set of nerves. His right rests where a whip becomes a metronome. On the roof, the guard has a short coach gun he can swing inside the arc of a jolting body. Across his knees, a sharps with a barrel slick from cleaning rags. Inside ride 9, mother and infant, prospector with a quiet greed in his eyes, 2 freighters who sit easy with weight and distance, a clerk for the express who hates dust but loves the certainties of a waybill, a woman bound for Denver with a letter she has read until it is a soft square, 2 boys who pretend to be men until the trail reminds them they are not. The rhythm is good. Snatch a fresh team at the swing station, keep the mail sacks dry, horn twice at the yard, roll. The wire has been temperamental these last days, tapping like a worried man's fingers. The driver reads the plain the way a woodsman reads bark. What should be moving and what is not. Antelope. None. Prairie dogs. Silent. A telegraph pole ahead leans wrong, not weather bent, but scissored in a clean bite. He does not point. The guard already knows. The roofman always knows first. When the first arrow hits, it clacks like a thrown stick on the coach door, not the thud the fancy stories promise. The second slides into the frame and hums. The mother makes a sound she will not remember making. The driver does not look back. Shutters down. The prospector fumbles with the leather latch, and the freighter beside him slaps his hand once, fast to make him remember his fingers. The guard crouches, not flat. Flat is a dare, but low enough to stay inside the sky. They come from the cutbanks, as they often do, because the land offers cover like it learned the trick from ambushes and never forgot. Decoys show first, 2, then 5, whooping, leaning back in their saddles the way men do when they want you to believe they have already spent their courage and will spend no more. To the right, the ground has soft earth, or looks like it, a promising drift where the horses could lose a shoe in one wrong step. To the left, rock shows through, and the driver takes it, because rock, at least, tells the truth about itself. He coaxes the team to lengthen rather than panic. The wheelers feel the pole hard and dig. The coach swings with the leather, a cradle motion that spares wood and ribs alike. The passengers who know the drill lean into the sway so they are not thrown from it. The clerk tries to count the time between shots as if counting could tidy the world, but the shots do not ask to be counted. The guard waits for a shape to be a certainty and not a wish, then fires. The coach guns blast a blunt syllable in the windy grammar. A young warrior takes it wrong in the shoulder and folds over his horse's mane. 2 more peel off, not retreating so much as resetting the angle. Because the best riders on this earth know not to take the same bite twice. The driver's eyes are never still. He watches where dust plumes meet the ground, which tells him whether he is looking at 6 riders or 60. He feels the bit of the off-leader, a mare with more heart than sense, and gives her a twitch that says, "Not yet, not that slope. Do not leave your partner to guess." He tastes alkali. He smells hot leather and animal fear, and the sour iron of his own mouth. He thinks, absurdly, of a song his sister liked, and that thought saves him from thinking of what happens if the pole snaps. A story lives in the Overland about Lem Flowers and a boy called Bill Cody, riding between Split Rock and 3 Crossings, when several hundred Sioux came at them all at once. Some paragraphs swear Flowers died in the box beside the driver. Some make him linger. In any version, the coach finished the run punctured with arrows like a hedgehog and 2 passengers dead inside, while the rest worked the shutters like gun slits and prayed by policy, not by denomination. Whether the numbers are right matters less than the technique. Ride the team hard, never stop to trade horses when you cannot read the yard, and keep a hand free to cut leather if leather turns into a noose. That lesson crosses years without losing a step. The second act of a plains ambush is always the same. The first danger is the fight, the second is the tangle. It comes when the off-wheeler catches a hoof in a badger hole or slides on a hidden patch of melt. The big horse goes down, and the coach tries to fold the world to fit that truth. The traces snarl, the pole torques, and what was a road becomes a knot. The driver plants his boots, throws the brake, and shouts the only prayer the plains honor: stand, not to God, but to the team. The guard and one freighter are off the roof and ground in a heartbeat, knives out, hacking leather. The clerk, who believed numbers could save him, finds a hatchet in the boot and surprises the day by doing something that matters. The prospector, seeing the infant's face gone slate pale, decides to be useful instead of a story and holds the mare's head so she does not thrash herself to death. 2 riders slide in from the left too fast, confident in the logic of panic. The guard racks the sharps, aims at the horse's chest, because a wounded man may shoot back, but a fallen horse only breaks a charge, and fires. The shot turns one animal, and the other rider checks, eyes flicking past courage into calculation. The freighter's knife frees the tangled hame. The driver kicks the dead trace clear and sets the brake 1 click less, enough to roll without bolting. Up! The wheelers surge. The coach lurches over the fallen horse and becomes a vehicle again instead of a question. People who have not done it think you can run from such a thing. You do not run, you thread. The driver watches the lips of the wash and aims for the shallowest light, reading the color of dust as if it were ink. He keeps a fraction of pull on the leaders so they do not outrun the swing team and turn the coach into a compass lost to its needle. The guard fires as little as he can and as much as he needs. He can smell his barrel and has a water bag ready to cool it, because steel lies if you ask it for too many answers in a row. Up ahead, a station, the kind of country refuge a tired man dreams about. Corral, low house, windmill. But the gate hangs wrong, and the yard is too clean. No saddle blanket left on the rail, no dung where there should be dung, no man cursing a mule in a tone that says all is ordinary. The driver does the bravest thing a coachman can do. He does not stop. He takes the left rut, fresher, less churned, and rides the outside of the yard so the house sits to the right where the guard can rake it if it coughs men instead of warmth. A shot skips from the far corner, high and foolish, and the guard ignores it the way a father ignores a tantrum. The station falls away. Not a trap today, a lesson instead. Memory drags up another tactic from a year when the Sweetwater ran lean. 2 coaches abreast, sacks of mail piled between them, men shoveling sand over the canvas to make a breastwork, holding a day-long fight while stock was run off, and the sun burned through the thin air like a lid set on low. When dark came and the horses were gone, the survivors harnessed themselves and dragged the coaches by hand toward a light that was mercy and not a fire. That is not romance. That is the mathematics of weight, will, in a road that does not care who lifts which. The run tilts toward mercy at last. The riders thin, not vanishing so much as deciding. The coach keeps to rock where it can, to creak stones when it must, and the team, remembering that they are animals who prefer to live, settles into a carriage trot that eats distance without tearing muscle. A home station receives them with eyes that look like lamps in fog. The yard is a wreck of hurried repairs. An axe leans where it shouldn't, and a bucket lies on its side in a stance that means it fell from a running hand. The station tender has a face washed in large smoke and fear. You saw them. It is not a question. They were here. Inside the house, the world returns in clumsy order. Water, then coffee, then the sound of someone trying to laugh and failing. The guard cleans the sharps in a ritual that is as much penance as maintenance. The mother counts the baby's fingers as if counting could make a promise. The clerk writes time of arrival with a hand that shakes less the longer it moves. Someone says Mud Springs like a prayer. Someone else says Rush Creek like a door that swings both ways. News circulates, wrapped in names and distances that keep changing shape the longer they are spoken. The driver eats beans he cannot taste and lets his hands shake where the passengers cannot see them. Outside across the year, the pattern continues. Julesburg, a memory never far. Mud Springs and Rush Creek, the winter's grim liturgy. Platte Bridge Station, a summer crowning wound, where arrogance and necessity argued, and the water wrote its answer in red. But those belong to days with their own clocks. This day ends at a table sticky with coffee where a mother thanks a freighter without saying the words. And a prospector decides to give the guard one of his cartridges as if it were a coin for a ferry he hopes never to ride again. The conductor signs the book. The lamps are turned low. The driver goes outside to check the harness, even though he knows he already checked it, because touch is the only argument he trusts right now. What did the road ask today? Everything that could be spared. What did it give back? The sound of horses breathing, alive. A coach that is still a coach and not a story. A lesson that will travel faster than the mail. If the yard is too quiet, if the pole leans wrong, if your fear wants you to stop, don't. The Overland writes such rules in bone and wood. A man breaks one only once. Dawn is older now. The next team stands ready, ears like flags, eyes gentle, hearts ignorant. The driver sets his boot on the step, turns to look along the road and, for the first time today, lets himself pause. What else is waiting? He knows the answer. The plains are patient, so are the men who ride them. The question is not if. It is when and how well you remember the last lesson when the next one starts to speak. By summer, the wind lost its knife but kept its habit of carrying news. Word moved up and down the Platte faster than hooves could make it, braided from rumor and report. Stations rebuilt and burned again, escorts doubled, herds vanishing into the blue distances. Names of the winter's fights, Julesburg, Mud Springs, Rush Creek, spoken now like chapters already read. June broke the land into glittering heat. July taught everyone that the season had not changed the lesson, only the light it was written in. They called it Platte Bridge Station, a square of earth where the telegraph key ticked and the quartermaster counted barrels and beans. The bridge itself ran a rib of timber over the river, wide even in summer and treacherous with bars that moved when it pleased them. The station had a look all post-share when they know they sit where intention and consequence cross. Walls that leaned a little from too much wind, a smell of mule sweat and lard smoke, and a stack of empty crates saved because men hate to throw away what might be useful if the world goes crooked. West of the post, a wood train, wagons and axemen, had moved out to cut fuel. Between their camp and the station stretched a mile or two of prairie that offered no help but honesty. On July 26, 1865, the day began as days do on the plains, with the ordinary, before it bent into something the country still holds under its tongue. The request came thin and nervous over the wire. The wood train felt the country around it tighten, and the escort sent the words every soldier dreads. Riders in force. Inside the post, a young officer, Casper Collins, 20, freckled in the way, sunlight-freckled soldiers raised east of the 95th meridian, took the duty no one could refuse, and few survived when the odds were poor. Ride out, bring them in. He was no fool. The land already taught him more than any drill book had. But he also belonged to a tradition that fields its lessons with a straight back. He drew together a small detachment and pointed them toward the western bank. There are ambushes that announce themselves like thunderheads, and others that wait until you have already argued yourself into thinking you chose the right path. Decoys came first, plain as always and as irresistible. Skirmishers who lingered just within carbine reach to tempt a charge, and when the bluecoats leaned their mounts to accept the invitation, the curtain lifted. From rimrock and coulee, from prairie folds so shallow you would have sworn a man could not hide a dog there, an alliance of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho rose in numbers no small relief could swallow. It was the same winter logic written in summer light. Make the road lift a hand to protect itself. Make that hand pay. The bridge, broad and modern by frontier standards, was suddenly a thin idea over a wide truth. Collins pushed into the open, between the station and the wood train, trying to peel the wagons home with the small force he had and whatever God grants a man who rides in full daylight. The first volleys hammered the air flat. Horses screamed, men shouted, and you could smell sap where bullets clipped willow. There are versions of the story where Collins turns his head, where he calls for a trooper to fall in, where he lifts his pistol and does not fire because he knows it will not matter. What is certain is the ground around the bridge ramp was written in loops of hoof and scuff, in fallen hats and a young man's body, whose name was older than the post he died to defend. They named the fort Fort Casper afterward, as if christening might persuade consequence to feel like honor. The town that grew there kept the sound, shaving the P down to a city's name and leaving the missing letter where men leave most things they cannot carry forward, with the dead. Across the same hours, a second engagement knotted and broke a few miles away, what would be remembered as Red Buttes, where a supply train bled itself smaller under the same pressure. The station called for what the station could call for. More men at the firing ports, more powder at the ready. The howitzer rolled to where it could stab the distance with rough punctuation. Inside the walls, a telegrapher worked his key with the cool that comes when terror runs out and duty arrives to replace it. His messages went east and west as if he were stitching the skin of a torn-up animal and praying it might hold under strain. What did the Allied camps see that noon? From within the dust plume, the world was simpler and heavier. The road and its wire had choked off the old way, sending soldiers in file along the valley, laying down posts like rocks in a river the people meant to cross. Food and horses were the difference between an argument and a tragedy, and both could be had by breaking the road's grip. The bridge was a throat. The post was a tooth. Hit those, and you spoke in a language the Overland understood. Some rode for honor, for society and name. Some rode for grief, for Sand Creek and the laughter of boys who no longer laughed. Some rode because the herd needs grass and the children need meat. All rode sober. They did not need to win ground they would not keep. They needed to unmake the certainty of a schedule. By late afternoon, smoke lay in sheets. Men on both sides had the copper taste of too much breathing hard. There were moments of recognition that the reports never write down, the way a soldier leveling his carbine at a rider saw not a painted demon, but a man younger than himself with a braid dark on his neck. The way a warrior leaning past his pony's shoulder to loose an arrow saw not a faceless blue mass, but a boy whose hands shook because he could not keep it from shaking. Ledger art from the years that followed would draw some of these moments. The bridge a long rectangle, horses in profile with hooves planted like words in sentences, men flying from saddles in arcs that meant both falling and a kind of rising. The Army's files recorded killed, wounded, missing. The people who drew pictures recorded feeling in sequence, the method in the motion. When dusk at last laid a claim on the valley, the wood train was a wreck of silence. The station still stood, punched but stubborn, the wire flickering alive long enough to wash the story down the line. The Army named valor, the Alliance named success. Neither side lied exactly. Collins's death was a weight the garrison wore like a new piece of gear that didn't fit. The warriors counted captured stock and the fact that the road learned, again, that it could be made to look after itself rather than push deeper without looking left or right. The human ledger was crowded. A trooper with a cheek lanced by splinters who wrote home that he had finally understood why his father hated silence. A station woman who put bread and a rifle on the same table and never afterwards set one without the other. A boy in camp who learned that day to read a trail for the angle of fresh iron shoes and later would teach his son to do the same. For the Overland organization, the summer hardened policy. Escorts thickened where they could be spared. A coach approaching a station signaled with bugle calls that varied by division, a little music meant to say, "We are we." Tenderfoot drivers learned old hands yardcraft. Never halt in the open, never let the wheelers nap on the pole, never startle a team whose ears say the wind is speaking. The company talked quietly about closing sections if the road bled too much coin. Publicly, it spoke of perseverance. The Telegraph, hero and hostage both, taught its attendants a new choreography. Cut teams sent menders with spools and mules, and the splicers worked with knives and clamps in a posture halfway between craftsman and picket. Communities along the line changed their calendar to fit conflict. Church bells counted relief detachments as gladly as they counted Sundays. Funerals learned to speak plainly. No fine euphemisms for boys who died in dust with a task unfinished. Road ranches kept back a private stash of coffee and sugar for days when coaches arrived with faces you could not refuse. On native ground, the camps gathered in closer or stretched apart as hunting and safety required. Old patterns adjusting to new threats, women and old men deciding what could travel and what must be cashed against a turn in fortune. Songs took on lines anyone on either side would have recognized. A verse for absence, a verse for vigilance, a chorus that said the world had changed its boots and the tread was different, but the foot was the same. If a philosophy sprouted from the dust that July, it was this: the road is a bargain, not a destiny. The Overland could promise speed, mail on time, faces delivered where they said they wanted to go. It could not promise peace to the land it crossed. Each station measured itself now in two currencies, minutes and risk, and the books balanced only when there were enough horses, enough cartridges, and enough people willing to lay their bodies between a schedule and whatever opposed it. The Allied camps did not exist to thwart a timetable. They rode for a country that could not be described inside a ledger. Two truths met on the Platte and argued as long as the grass would hold their weight. Night brought a lull. The station lamps turned the yard into small islands. The river muscled along, indifferent. In the barracks, someone whispered Casper, and the room fell quiet. In a camp beyond the reach of the wire, a woman counted a child's breaths, and a man sharpened a knife not because he would use it tomorrow, but because it is good to make things ready. Between them, in the dark that belongs to neither fort nor camp, lay the trail, worn deep enough that even the moon could find it. The season of running fights had not finished. It had only revealed itself. The next morning, coaches still rolled. They always did. What changed after Platte Bridge was not motion, but meaning. Every rattle of thoroughbrace, every horn at a gate, every signature on a waybill now came with the knowledge that the West was being stitched not only with wheels and wire, but with choices that left marks too fine for a map and too deep to ignore. Soon iron rails would write a new sentence across the same valley. But for the moment, the long, bruised moment of 1865, the Overland Trail remained a promise enforced by courage and contested by people whose names seldom appeared on the receipts, though their lives were written into every mile. The road does not confess its ending all at once. It thins first, less chatter on the wire, fewer hooves in the yard, longer pauses between bugle and change, until one morning a driver realizes that the wind now speaks louder than the schedule. Ben Holladay, who had wagered boldly on leather and nerve, could read weather in ledgers as clearly as any plainsman reads it in cloud. In the late autumn of 1866, he took the measure of iron, steam, and bonds and did what men of the frontier do when the river changes course. He sold the Overland stage line to Wells Fargo. The ink dried where coffee rings stained a desk, but the true signature was written along the Platte and Sweetwater, on ruts that would soon be less traveled than the shining path hammered west by gangs of men who sang to keep time with their hammers. The railroad was not a rumor by then. It was a rumor's older brother, bigger and less patient. Graders and tie cutters moved like ant swarms over the Basin, laying ties and rails, tamping ballast, building trestles where once only willows dared stand in the current. You could hear it days away. The clanging, the oaths, the spikes answering the maul with a note that said the world was being rephrased. When the Union Pacific and Central Pacific met iron to iron at a western desert's tongue of land in 1869, a telegraph key carried the moment to the nation in a single spark. Flags waved in towns that had never seen a locomotive, and men who had ridden the Overland looked down at their hands as if the lines and calluses might reveal what work a country still had for them. Some signed on with the rails because work is work and courage comes in different uniforms. Others drifted to freighting, to ranching, to law, and to the other thing, or west again to where the map still had blank places and the night still had the right number of stars. The coaches did not vanish, not all at once, not everywhere. Feeder lines kept right on running, shuttling passengers and mail from railhead to mining camp, from town to military post, from a place with too much noise to a place with just enough. In country where iron could not yet bite, the mountain basins, the pinyon uplands, the badland tongues that resisted surveyors, drivers still measured the world in teams and time. A careful man could ride a Concord through the 70s and into the 80s and pretend on good days that the old road still explained everything. Even as late as the 90s, you might see a stage pull into a canyon station gummy with large smoke and horses, and if you were new to the West, you would think for a moment that the century itself had mistimed its entrance. But the center had moved. The Overland's grand sentence, Atchison to Salt Lake in rolling clauses of leather and grit, was slowly punctuated with iron commas. Towns that had been home stations found themselves unlaced, their importance rerouted by survey stakes. Some stations with stout wells and good grass refused to die. They slid into new names and new trades, became road ranches for freighters or section houses for track crews, later depots for narrow-gauge spurs that climbed into the hills to haul ore and hope. Others simply slumped into the wind and gave their boards to other roofs. Julesburg, always a restless place, picked itself up and moved to suit the rail more than once, as if proving that a town is less a point on a map than a persistence of appetite and a knack for opportunity. Along the North Platte, some ruts deepened until they were stone-scarred grooves. Others softened back into grass so completely a stranger would never guess 1,000 hopes had passed this way. Memory, though, refuses to grade itself flat. On certain evenings when heat is leaving the earth, in the sky above the short grass goes the color of a worn coin, you can stand where the Oregon, Mormon, and Overland highways once braided, and the ground will show you the old script. Parallel cuts like lines in a ledger, clear as if the road had been written yesterday. You can close your eyes and hear the thorough braces groan, the horn's two-note command at the gate, the driver's low talk to a team that knows his hands better than his face. Somewhere a museum keeps a Concord coach polished in lamplight, its wheels a kind of prayer for anything honest that turns. A docent taps the leather and tells a group how these straps turn jolts into swing. A child imagines rocking in the dark and decides that fear might be a little like excitement if someone trustworthy holds the lines. The telegraph, that nervous system threaded along the Platte, yielded to the rail as obediently as nerve yields to bone. Poles marched beside the track now, line crews riding handcars, splicers swapping wire with a speed a stage run could never match. Still, the key's clack kept its old magic. Some operators left stage stations for rail depots. Others quit the wire to open newspapers and land offices and the kinds of little shops where a town learns its own appetite. The code did not change, only what it was asked to say, and how fast it was told to say it. Schedules left the hands of drivers and moved into tables printed as small as the typecaster dared. And in that ink, the West found a new kind of promise. The one that says, if you stand here at this time, steel will carry you away like fate doing duty as a timetable. Not everyone blessed the change. Road agents who once calculated how much courage a guard had left at mile 60 now studied the rails, learned the weight and pace of payroll cars, and began to compose other ambushes. Range wars and fence lines wrote fresh quarrels across the same old grass. The alliances that had unstitched the overland certainty learned that iron did not bargain. It arrived with troop trains and depots and a new kind of hunger that measured itself in sections and surveys. Ledger art drew trains as arrows with smoke, long teeth that bit the plains in a way horse and coach never could. In agency records and family stories, a harder chapter began. And yet there was mercy in the change too. Mail arrived with fewer funerals attached. Winter crossings took hours instead of days, and babies who would have taken chill in a coach made it to the next town in warmth. A man could send for tools he had once lived without. A woman could order cloth that made her feel briefly like someone in a place where sidewalks stayed underfoot and gaslights stayed lit. The cost did not shrink, but it altered shape, and some days the account balanced less cruelly than before. A country cannot grow without changing the way it moves. The question is whether it remembers what the old movement cost. So what do we remember? We remember a driver who could feel a stone as if it had bruised his own ribs, a guard who learned the discipline of shooting less, not more, because powder and minutes run out faster than you hope, a mother who counted a child's breaths while the coach rocked through a night that did not care whether she slept, a station tender who made coffee thick as decisions and kept a gate that swung right, not wrong, a telegrapher who sat with a blank wire and did not break before the line returned to life, a young officer whose name became a post, then a city, even as the letter that held the man in memory fell away in modern mouths. Men on the other side of the wire, riding for homeland and honor, teaching the road how truth looks from a saddle facing the other way. If the word overland means anything now, it is that courage and grief can ride in the same coach. And that history is not a set of dates, but a sound. The creak of leather, the breath of horses, the small clack of a key that says someone, somewhere, is listening. Drive the highways that shadow the old trail, and you will feel it without being told. A line of telegraph poles that served no wire in your lifetime still leans to the west. A low sod mound melts into pasture where a station once stood. A river ford glints in the sun like a truth you could still use if you had to. Town names repeat like stations on a run. Julesburg, Sedgwick, Casper, and in each is a story of a coach pulling in at dusk, of hooves ringing on hard dirt, of a hand on a lantern handle that could be yours if you had been born when distances had teeth. Somewhere a docent talks softly beside a red coach body. Somewhere else a rancher cuts hay on ground where mail sacks once made a barricade, and wonders why the field feels older than fences can account for. The West keeps its ledger in light and wind and road. You read it by walking slow and letting the names return on their own. What did the Overland Trail stitch together? A continent, yes, but also a discipline. To move with respect through a country that does not forgive haste. To see the people along the road as more than obstacles or footnotes. To admit that a timetable can be a kind of courage when it is not a weapon. What did it cost? Enough that the wind along the Platte still speaks of it when the grass lies down and the sky turns old gold. The coach that once rocked like a cradle now rocks in a museum's light. The rails that followed it still hum under freight the road could never have borne. Between them lies a truth that will not date. Progress is a good trail hand and a poor judge. Remember, and the country may yet forgive your speed. If you stand at a certain hour on the old grade and watch the day walk itself down, you will hear the end of it. Hoof beats once, a horn twice, laughter once more. Then the long, steady breath of iron crossing dark. The coach gave way to the locomotive, the stage stopped to the depot, the guard's scattergun to the conductor's watch. But the lesson remains, as clean as a cut pole and as hard as rock under a wheel. Keep your eyes on the rim, keep your hands steady on the lines, and when the yard is too quiet, drive on. The West will tell you the rest if you let it.